In today's video, we're going to discuss a potential trade between the Habs and the Jets involving Pierre-Luc Dubois. Another Montreal media member has made a proposal involving a highly touted prospect. We'll discuss the possibilities and if you think they should encourage that deal or not. Plus, we also have some trade rumors around the Washington Capitals and Evgeny Kuznetsov. We also have some other signings with some more prospects coming out of college, and we have another suspension involving Kings forward Blake Lizotte. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news, some trade rumors to take a look at today as well. But before we get into any of all that, I want to take a look back at this day in hockey history. It's actually another important key day with some significant moments in the past. Starting all the way back in 1917, we saw the Seattle Metropolitans in Seattle's first go-around in the NHL. They won the Stanley Cup on this day in 1917. They were the first U.S.-based team to do so. So that's pretty significant, of course. We've seen teams like Seattle, even the Ottawa Senators were around in the early 1900s and ended up folding and then eventually made their way back to the league all those years later. Also on this day in 1931, Art Ross, who of course is now named as a trophy named after him for the league's leading scorer, at the time was coaching the Boston Bruins. He became the first coach in NHL history to pull the goalie for an extra attacker as they were doing battle with the Montreal Canadiens in a playoff game where they were losing by a goal, and he decided to pull the goalie to get the extra attacker on in an attempt to tie it up. So it's not something that's been, practiced since the beginning of the NHL. Obviously, 1931 is still a really long time ago, but it's not, as old as you might think it is. It's certainly something you see pretty much on a regular basis now today, but back then it was almost unheard of. And also on this day in 1992, legendary goaltender, one of the greatest of all time, Martin Brodeur, mostly of the New Jersey Devils throughout his career, made his NHL debut and obviously went on to have one heck of a career, a Hall of Fame career, one of the greatest goalies of all time in the NHL. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of some prospect signings of college players coming out of college, turning pro. We also have some injury updates and a suspension to talk about before we get into some of the trade section of the video. So another big signing by the Montreal Canadiens today, signing another pretty solid defensive prospect, Sean Farrell, 21-year-old from Harvard, had a phenomenal season, putting up 20 goals and 33 assists in 34 games. Another smallish defenseman, 5'9", 175, but had a standout season. Like I said, on Harvard, he was part of the 2020 NHL draft class, taken in the fourth round, and gets his 3-year entry-level contract. So certainly another really solid defensive prospect. The Montreal Canadiens are pretty well loaded with college defensemen that have turned pro and are have more coming as well, especially in Lane Hutson, that we're also going to talk about in this video. But we've seen Jordan Harris and Jaden Struble, and of course you get Farrell and you get Hutson. Like, they have a lot of U.S. college defensemen in their system, and they are set along with guys like Kuzy and some of the other guys they have in the system. Jack Eye, Kovacevic has turned out to be a good pickup for them. They have tons of young defensemen. There's just no way they're going to be able to keep them all and have them all be a big part of the Habs system, but they're loaded, and Farrell is another real good one. Of course, with a lot of players of this size and stature, you do wonder, have a little bit of concerns over their ability to make the jump to pro hockey, and if the size will become an issue. Obviously, the skating and the skill level oftentimes does make it more feasible for these guys to be successful in today's game, which is why you see more smaller defensemen having success. But at the same time, as for some of them, it is a big, learning curve and big gap with the size and strength of the players at that level, that it is a struggle for some. So we'll see how he does, but another real interesting, solid prospect there. Montreal's done a real good job of making sure they get all their key prospects under contract. The Vancouver Canucks also made a fairly significant signing as well. Another player that had a lot of interest in him was a centerman for Western Michigan University, Max Sasson. He gets a 2-year ELC. He's a little bit older. He put up 42 points this year in 38 games played at Western Michigan. He's a 6'1", 185-pound center. His ELC will kick in next season, and he will go to the American Hockey League in Abbotsford on an amateur tryout for the remainder of the regular season. So they'll be able to start down there and see where things go. Another Canucks signing that they also made recently, a little bit of a higher ton of prospect, Aiden McDonough, is making his NHL debut this afternoon as well in the Canucks game. So certainly interested to see how that works out for him. So some more signings there. I know there's some more players, especially from Harvard, like Farrell, getting some attention. I know Matthew Coronado in Calgary, another one, are wondering if he'll sign there. Right now, the expectation is kind of trending towards the fact that I guess it's expected that he will, but it's tough. Until it's done, it's not done. And Harvard prospects amongst, I think to me, are the most likely to jump ship. We've seen it happen way too many times over the years where some solid players have come out of the Harvard program and then ended up not signing with a team that drafted them. I know guys like Jimmy Vesey and Adam Fox are a couple that come to mind right off the bat, but some of these other guys that are coming out now are signing with their teams, so we'll see if that trend is maybe changing or whatnot. A few other updates on some roster moves. The Boston Bruins had to recall Oster Steen today on an emergency basis. I'm not sure who was out. I didn't get a chance to see that. For the Bruins, they're doing battle with the Carolina Hurricanes today. The Hurricanes also throwing it back to their Hartford Whaler heritage as well in today's action. Also, the Red Wings have returned Matt Luff, Austin Zarnik, and one of their top prospects, and Simon Evanson, back down to the American Hockey League. Of course, Evanson got to come up, make his NHL debut, appeared in 3 NHL games, and scored his first goal. It's expected he's going to be a big part of the blue line for years to come. Obviously, they give him a year of development in the American Hockey League. Be curious to see if he's ready for full-time deployment at the NHL level next year, or if they'll continue to have him develop. Traditionally, Detroit does not rush their prospects, so we'll see where things go on that front. Also, we have another suspension today, and it's a very similar scenario that we talked about yesterday. Of course, we saw AJ Greer cross-check Habs forward Mike Hoffman right in the mouth, and this is the same scenario with Blake Lizotte of the Los Angeles Kings doing the same thing to Jets defenseman Josh Morrissey. To me, this was a gutless act, and again, just like Greer, I think this should be more than one game. I guess if you look at the two, they're both one-game suspensions. I guess we can at least say they're being consistent, which is also a good thing. But at the same time, I just think these are malicious intents that had pretty, gruesome circumstances, lots of stitches and blood on the other side of the injury. Only one game to me just doesn't seem like it's nearly enough. So Lizotte and Morrissey are coming up the ice. They're kind of tangled up a bit. Kind of looks in a way like Lizotte's kind of holding on to him. Eventually they start to separate. Lizotte's slightly in front. Morrissey gives him what I'd call a light slash in the shins where there's padding. Tap. And I don't really think it's really anything too serious at all. But Lizotte goes up, there's a little button hook, comes back. Morrissey sees him coming at him because Morrissey had gone to the bench for a change. But instead of going over the boards and into the bench, he stopped because he's seen Lizotte coming at him. So he drops his stick and his gloves because he figured Lizotte was coming for a fight. And instead, Lizotte skates up to him and kind of suckers him in with a two-handed cross check to the face. So to me, that's gutless. You got an opponent that you were kind of having a battle with all the way up the ice, nothing real serious, and emerge from it. He thinks you want to fight, drops his gloves, and then instead of fighting, you go that route. I mean, to me, he took advantage of a guy who no longer had a stick in his hands to defend himself or to retaliate at all, and he did that. Like, to me, like, that's just, it's not good at all. It's like I said, it's a gutless act, definite intent there, and I think one game is just not enough for Lizotte, and I don't think it's the same for AJ Greer in Boston. I don't know. It's kind of weird how we see these two type of scenarios so similar, so close together. But I will see. I mean, like I said, it's hard to imagine what goes on in NHL player safety sometime. There seems to be some, odd decisions, but at least they're being consistent, I guess we can say. On to the trade section of the video. I do want to talk a little bit further today about the Washington Capitals. And of course, Evgeny Kuznetsov is a player that we talked about yesterday. Kuzy's a player that we reportedly requested on trade and wants a fresh start, get away from the Capitals organization. And this is not the first time this has come up between discussions between the player and team, which we had heard about before, not so much in the past year or so, but probably 2 seasons back. I know at one point there was a lot of issues between the player and the team, especially when there was a lot of the COVID restrictions and protocols in place. I know at one point the Capitals got, I believe that if I remember correctly, I think that team got a fine, a substantial fine, and there was a bunch of the Russian players hanging up together in a room that were breaking the rules or something. I don't remember the whole story. I just remember that Kuznetsov was part of that, and there seemed to be some building, lack of trust or tension between the team and the player, and there was some speculation that they were seriously considering trading him. Obviously, leading up to this season, there was some talk that maybe they would do that. Of course, they didn't, and here we are again now with the player looking for a fresh start. Certainly, the Washington Capitals are a team that's not going to be looking to rebuild. They have obviously some other veteran players on the team that I think they will look to move, including Anthony Mantha. But obviously, Kuznetsov is a player that should draw some interest. He's a real good offensive player, got a good amount of experience. He's not too old, but his contract's a little hefty at $7.8 million. Maybe Washington's willing to retain a little bit of that to make it a little bit more manageable. But according to Dave Pagnotta, the fourthperiod.com, a team to possibly watch in this scenario is the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets, according to Pagnotta, had interest in this player before the last time around when there was more consideration for a trade being made by the Capitals on him, but of course never came to be. It's clear and obvious now that the Jackets do want to add more experience depth at center down the middle. So he does make sense for the team from that perspective, but there's also been a lot of rumors and links of the Blue Jackets to Flyers centerman Kevin Hayes, pretty much saying that it's all but a done deal. The framework's been agreed upon and everything, that the Flyers were going to retain, I think it was around 30% of Hayes' salary. He's going to go back, play with his old buddy Johnny Gaudreau, who they went to college with, and that was going to be a way for the Jackets to add an experienced centerman. I don't know if they'd want to add Hayes and Kuznetsov. I guess we'll have to see where things go. Maybe they do. They probably could use both, to be completely honest. They don't have a lot down the middle right now, but it's going to be interesting where that goes on that front. But Kuznetsov, to the Jackets seems to be a possibility based on what Pagnotta is saying. Also some speculation in The Athletic around writer Tariq El-Bashir, who also commented on the Kuznetsov trade request, but also talked about the future of head coach Peter Laviolette. Laviolette is on an expiring contract, and there's a lot of questions, debates whether or not he will be back next season. Now, the writer in this article, El-Bashir, basically says he gives it a 50-50 chance that he goes or stays. He can see it going in either direction. I mean, obviously, I don't know if you can completely fault the coaching staff for the lack of results this year. If they do miss the playoffs, it's not going to be by a lot. And they've had a ton of adversity thrown at them this year. A lot of injuries. I mean, you've seen John Carlson miss over 30 games. Obviously, even though Ovechkin had missed a stretch, of course, because of family reasons. Connor Brown was out majority of the season as well. This team has not been healthy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's been lots of other injuries as well amongst other key players on the team. So really, if you think about it, they are likely going to be a team that's looking to retool quickly on the fly and bounce back next year. That's what I fully suspect from Brian McClellan in Washington going into the offseason. We're going to probably see a few trades trying to change things up, but come back and be competitive as early as next year. As long as Ovechkin's on that roster, they're not going to go through a rebuild. That's a given. And that's fair to say. Ovechkin is never going to go for that. He wants to try to win while he's under contract, while he's playing in the NHL, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, the other question is, will they want Ovechkin to go through yet another coach? Is he going to want that? Well, obviously, if he likes and trusts Laviolette, does it not make sense to sign him on? I guess if Laviolette and the Capitals are willing to come to maybe a 2-year extension or something like that, maybe that makes a lot of sense for the team and the coach, giving a chance to kind of bounce back and retool here. But we'll see. There's a number of NHL coaches and executives around the league that have uncertainty based on contract that we're going to be keeping an eye on, and Laviolette certainly one will add to that list. Now, in Montreal, as I talked about earlier, we have a trade scenario I want to discuss. I've seen this article based on comments made by Georges Larac, of course, from BPM Sport, former player. He sometimes makes some pretty bold statements, and he's been a huge fan, there's no doubt, of bringing Pierre-Luc Dubois to the Montreal Canadiens. I've seen him talk about this on various podcasts and radio interviews about what Montreal should do, especially in regards to trying to bring Dubois to Montreal. Now, the most recent thing that he said that some might think is a little wild, a little crazy, but certainly, something that was worth considering would be trading top prospect defenseman Lane Hutson of Boston College, who's putting up tons of fantastic numbers, drawing comparisons to some of the game's top young defensemen for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now, of course, we know Dubois is wanting to go to Montreal. He's made that clear. It's been a hot topic in the city of Montreal for pretty much almost a year now. Last offseason, the player and his agent both made comments to basically confirm the long-rumored strategy they had to get Dubois to be a Montreal Canadien. And that's where he wants to be, and that he's not going to sign long-term with Winnipeg. And he had to have that discussion because of his contract being expired last year. Wouldn't sign long-term with the Jets. Made it known that he'd love to play in Montreal. Before he was ever signed, when he was still in limbo and still in RFA, his agent even made comments saying that, yes, there was no doubt that his long-term vision to play in Montreal was something that he would love to see himself do someday. So there's been a lot of talk of Montreal wanting to have mutual interest and bring him in as well, and where he could fit in their lineup. He's still, only going to be in his mid-20s, and is this team ready to, take these young players and start to accelerate things the other direction in the next year or so? If he's willing to sign long-term, I can see that making sense. But obviously, should Montreal just wait and get him as a UFA? That's the question. But the problem here is that Montreal might not have a choice but to trade for him, I guess, if they really want to make sure that they get their player. But it's how is this going to play out? If Dubois won't sign in Winnipeg more than 1 year, he's not going to have any trade protection in that contract yet. I can't see a scenario where Kevin Cheveldayoff does not trade Dubois in the offseason if he refuses to sign anything more than a 1-year deal. It just does not make sense. It puts the team at way too much risk and too much jeopardy of losing the player for nothing. They're not going to do that. But then again, other teams are not necessarily going to want to trade for him either without having any kind of certainty that he'll sign a contract with them. And if they all think, no, he wants to go to Montreal, then they're not going to want to make that trade for him. So it makes sense that Montreal and Winnipeg just get it done with and cut their losses here and get the deal done. Now, to me, that says that Montreal is going to have all the leverage because they're going to know that Dubois wants to go there. He's not going to sign anywhere else, and that they're not going to necessarily have to pay a premium price. They can also say to Winnipeg, well, if we don't do this, he signs a 1-year deal. If you have to wait long enough, he can go through arbitration, get a 1-year deal, and we'll just sign him next summer. So, are they going to have to give up a prospect like Hutson to make the deal happen? I don't think they will. Now, will Winnipeg want a player like that? Absolutely. They're going to look at Montreal's young, D prospects especially, and they're going to want one of those. I have no doubts about it. Whether it's Hutson or Farrell or one of the guys that's already on the roster, I have no doubt Cheveldayoff will be talking to Kent Hughes and want one of those promising young defense. If not, more than that, of course. But are they going to have to budge? Are they going to have to do a deal? I don't necessarily think they will. I think Montreal is going to have all the leverage here and probably be able to pull Dubois out of Winnipeg for a much smaller price tag. But if I'm George Laraque, I understand the desire to bring in Dubois into the Habs organization. I understand the fact that he's already established. You know what you're getting. He's going to be a big piece for the future. Whereas some of these prospects, they're just that. They're prospects. They may not work out. And they're not all going to turn pro and turn into stars. That's just statistically very unlikely. But at the same time, you have to be careful here. You don't want another repeat of what happened with Mikhail Sergachev going to Tampa for Durant. That never worked out. You gave away basically Ryan McDonough as well to the Rangers years ago. That didn't work out. This guy is getting comparison to some of the top young defensemen already having a major impact in the NHL, like Adam Fox and Cale Makar, etc. Do you really want to take a chance to trade this guy for a player that you're probably going to be able to get if you're patient enough anyways, without really, paying a premium price to do so? I think they can. I don't think it makes sense. I think Montreal can get Dubois for a way better deal. So let me know what your thoughts are. We'll talk about it further down in the comments, but especially if you're a Habs fan and you get Pierre-Luc Dubois a little bit sooner, rather than signing him as a free agent, you get him early, but you have to give up a top young prospect like Lane Hutson. Are you doing that deal, or are you saying, hold on here, we'll just take our time and wait, no thanks, we'll sign him for free, or you're going to have to lower your asking price substantially if you want to do it now? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.